Hey friends, we're back with American Miscellany, published in 1865, and I'm afraid it might be getting a little heavy here with our next essay. It's called The Fall of Babylon. So this is a great big book of essays, many essays by many authors. It's very random. Our last subject, for example, was divisions of the globe. A little boring, in my opinion. It's all right. Our next subject is The Fall of Babylon, and this is essay number 114. But before we start reading that essay, I've got to say the publisher tends to put these little paragraphs in, little sentences here and there to fill up space as he's printing these essays. So I guess the last essay wasn't quite long enough. So the publisher of American Miscellany, Mr. Robert Sears, added this little, sentence or two. It's called Truth and Justice. So let's just, let's read what we can learn about truth and justice. All right, truth and justice are the immutable laws of social order. Far from us to be the dangerous maxim that it is sometimes useful to mislead, to enslave, and to deceive mankind to ensure their happiness. Cruel experience has at all times proved that with impunity these sacred laws can never be injured. Hey. Seems like a lot of double negatives there. It seems like how a villain would explain itself, but okay, that's truth and justice. Let's go grand. Let's start The Fall of Babylon. So this is essay number 114. We're on page 279. Let's read about the fall of Babylon. The history of the fall of Babylon may be found at large in Herodotus and in Josephus's Antiquities of the Jews. It is likewise described by Strabo, Xenophon, and Diodorus Siculus. The profligacy and impiety of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, had excited the divine anger, and at the visible interposition of the God whom he had derided and blasphemed, he lost at once his kingdom and his life. Having provided a splendid entertainment for the nobles of his court, he commanded to be brought the golden cups, those spoils of the Jewish temple which Nebuchadnezzar, after his successful siege of Jerusalem, had carried into the sanctuary of his own God. These splendid goblets he ordered to be used by his guests in their drunken revelry, thus not only profaning the sacred vessels originally devoted to the purposes of the Jewish ceremonial worship, but likewise polluting those of his country's gods, as those Jewish vessels had been consecrated to the rites of his own religion. This double sacrilege did not pass without its retribution. During the feast, the most odious blasphemies were uttered by the king and the revelers who composed his court. They sung praises to those divinities of wood and stone, which were the objects of their hollow adoration, as if in mockery of him who, though mighty to save, proved to the Chaldean king and his nobles that he is mighty also to destroy. In the midst of their impious feast, the finger of God inscribed their sentence upon the wall of the court, in which they were audaciously deriding him. While in the very act of profaning the sacred vessels, the king perceived, to his utter consternation, a hand tracing upon the wall in legible characters the terrible record of his doom. Astounded at a sight so singular and appalling, He sent for the astrologers, who at that time were regularly retained in the eastern courts, together with all the persons who had acquired repute as diviners, prophets, and interpreters of dreams. From these he demanded an explanation of the mysterious writing. The seal of God, which they could not break, was upon it. Amazed and confounded, the king dismissed them, and called others to unveil the fearful mystery in which his destiny appeared to be shrouded. No one could read the record. The royal blasphemer was abashed, and his conscience shrunk from the apprehension of impending destruction. Nitocrea, his mother, a woman of masculine energies who had successfully fortified her native city against the Medes and Persians, roused the effeminate king from the stupor of despair by telling him to send for Daniel the Jew. This servant of the living God, as he is elsewhere styled in the scriptures, was then with many of his countrymen in captivity at Babylon, and had rendered himself celebrated among the Chaldeans by having interpreted the dreams of Nebuchadnezzar. The king accordingly sent for the prophet and desired him to interpret the writing which had baffled the penetration of all his wise men. The Chaldean monarch promised to bestow upon Daniel the third part of his dominions if he should succeed in unfolding the awful mystery still visible upon the wall, where it had been traced by a supernatural hand. But so, to use the words of Josephus, Daniel desired that he would keep his gifts to himself, for that which is the effect of wisdom and of divine revelation admits of no gifts, and bestows its advantages on petitioners freely. Nevertheless, that he would explain the writing to him, which denoted that he must soon die, and this because he had not learned to honor God. And moreover, because he had quite forgotten how Nebuchadnezzar was removed to feed among wild beasts for his impieties, and did not recover his former life among men and his kingdom, but upon God's mercy to him, after many supplications and prayers, who did therefore praise God all the days of his life, as one of almighty power, and who takes care of mankind. Daniel also put Belshazzar in mind how greatly he had blasphemed against God, and had made use of his sacred vessels among his depraved nobles and concubines. That therefore God, seeing this, was displeased with him, and had declared by this writing that his life would have a most awful termination. He then explained the writing as follows: Mene, this, if it be expounded in the Greek language, will signify a number, because God has numbered so long a time for thy life and for thy government, and that there remains but a small portion. Tekel, this signifies a weight, and means that God has weighed thy kingdom in the balance, and finds it already on the decline. Pharis, is that an R? Yes, Pharis. This also, in the Greek tongue, signifies a fragment. God will therefore break thy kingdom in pieces and divide it among the Medes and the Persians. The king was confounded at this interpretation. Nevertheless, he bestowed upon Daniel what he had promised. Immediately after, the city was taken, and Belshazzar was put to death. The manner of its capture was singular. About 540 years before the birth of Christ, Cyrus the Great had invested the capital of Chaldea. His armies had been everywhere victorious, yet trusting in the prodigious strength of their city and the wise counsels of Nitocrea, the queen's mother, the Babylonians derided the efforts of the Persian. They had provisions sufficient for a consumption of 20 years. The walls of their city were of prodigious strength, being 350 feet high and 87 thick. They were built of bricks, formed of a material so firm in texture as to be harder than granite. Those bricks were cemented together with a glutinous earth that in time became as hard as the masses which it united. In spite of all these mighty obstacles, Cyrus resolved upon the reduction of this apparently impregnable capital. To this end he constructed a number of wooden towers, higher than the walls, and made many desperate efforts to carry the place by storms, but every attempt was foiled. He next drew a line of a circumvallation around the city, thus hoping to starve the enemy into a surrender. 2 years were spent in this unavailing blockade, when an opportunity presented itself of effecting that purpose by stratagem, which he had hitherto failed to accomplish by open force. Having heard that the king was about to celebrate a great festival, and knowing from his licentious character that it would be a scene of the grossest riot, he posted a part of his army close to the spot where the river Euphrates entered the city, and another at the opposite side where it passed out, with orders to enter the channel wherever it was fordable. He then detached a third party to open the head of a canal connected with the Euphrates, and thus admit the river into the trenches which he had opened round the city. By these means the river was so completely drained by midnight that the troops easily made their way along its bed, and the gates upon the banks having been left unclosed in consequence of the revels, or neglected during the confusion of the festival, the besiegers found no interruption to their progress. Having thus penetrated into the heart of the enemy's capital, they met, according to agreement, at the gates of the palace. Here, after a feeble resistance, they easily overpowered the guards, cut to pieces all who opposed them, slew the king, and within a few hours received the submission of Babylon the Mighty. From this period it ceased to be the metropolis of a kingdom, and its grandeur rapidly declined. Not a memorial now remains of its former greatness, and scarcely even a trace of its site. A little poem. Where now are Troy and mightier Babylon? On their proud site the earth is wild and bare. O'er them stern time has a full victory won, and they are mingled with the things that were. Thus works destruction. From his secret lair he skulks abroad to mar what men has made. Decay, slow mining, meets us everywhere. Earth's pageantries are fugitive. Here fade all things alike. The debts of nature must be paid. Okay, let's finish reading and then take a look at the engravings. In the engraving of the Fall of Babylon, the artist has endeavored to exhibit the Chaldean capital at the height of its glory. In the distance, the mighty Tower of Babel, which he supposes to have been still standing upon the plains of Shinar, rears its stupendous bulk, hiding its summit in the clouds, a monument of human presumption and human impotency. The high tower upon the bank of the river is the celebrated temple of Belus, the external buildings of which were raised by Nebuchadnezzar. This huge tower was 600 feet square at the base and the same number of feet high. The temple was set apart for the worship of Baal, and the treasure contained within its walls in the palmy days of the Chaldean Empire has been estimated at 42 millions sterling. Upon the right of the temple of Belus, as the spectator faces the water on that side, stands the palace of Semiramis, 4 miles in circumference. To this extraordinary woman, Babylon first owed its greatness. She left everywhere immortal monuments of her genius and her power. She was the greatest warrior of her time. Why have I never heard of her? To facilitate communication with her capital, she hollowed mountains and filled up valleys, and water was conveyed at a vast expense by immense aqueducts to deserts and unfruitful plains. The bridge seen in our engraving was built by Nitocris, the mother of Belshazzar. In the right-hand corner of the engraving is seen the palace of Nebuchadnezzar, 8 miles in circumference and surmounted by the celebrated hanging gardens. These occupied a square of 400 feet on every side and consisted of spacious terraces raised one above the other until they reached the height of the city walls. The whole pile was sustained by immense arches built upon other arches and supported on either side by a wall 22 feet thick. The crowd which appeared in the bed of the river is the enemy setting fire to the Babylonian navy. On the right of these is the Persian horse headed by Cyrus. The group in the near foreground consists of the king and a party of the enemy. These attack and destroy him in sight of several of his concubines who had escaped with him from the palace. Here is one of those awful pages in the records of time, which may be summed up in this brief exclamation: "How are the mighty fallen!" Let's take a look at our illustrations here. So this first one is called Belshazzar's Feast. Daniel interpreting the handwriting on the wall. There we go, Belshazzar's Feast. And I believe the next image, it's entitled The Fall of Babylon, but it's printed very badly. I don't know if y'all can get a good look at it. It's doesn't have much contrast. I guess the blacks didn't get black enough, but hopefully you can get a nice look at it. There we go, The Fall of Babylon.